Okay, for this video I really wanted to focus on perspective and narratology in film music, and briefly explore the history of narrative within the moving image. To put this into practice, I decided to rescore a short film made available for a competition a few years ago. I actually entered the competition but didn't do very well, so I thought it would be good to go back to it and focus on how I could have improved my score. The film is called Capture, and follows the story of a man who finds a cursed camera on the floor. Music has a lot of different roles in film, but for this video I will be mainly focusing on non-diegetic music, or the off-screen soundtrack that the characters aren't aware of. Before getting into too much detail about music's role in assisting a film's narrative, I first wanted to explore what music is even doing in films in the first place. There is a famous conversation between composer David Raskin and one of Hitchcock's men about the need for a score for the 1944 film Lifeboat. One of Hitchcock's people said to me, "There's not going to be any music in our picture," and I said, "Why?" "Well, Hitchcock says they're out in the open ocean, where would the music come from?" So I said, "Go back and ask him where the camera comes from, and I'll tell him where the music comes from." The introduction of music to picture began in the silent film era, where the music had to communicate a lot more than it does today, as it was essentially the dialogue. It was also used to drown out the sound of the movie house projectors. But when dialogue and sound effects were introduced to films, what was the need for the music to remain? Well, as the composer Hans Eisler states, music was introduced as a kind of antidote against the picture. The need was felt to spare the spectator the unpleasantness involved in seeing effigies of living, acting, and even speaking persons who were at the same time silent. Eisler goes on to talk about the fact that without sound, the people the audience see on screen are both living and non-living at the same time, and created a ghostly effect that music helped to alleviate, not by supplying them with the life they lacked, but to exercise fear or help the spectator absorb the shock. Music seeks to breathe into the pictures some of the life that photography has taken away from them. Music is also used as a mediation or a bridge between quite a few things. Historically, between old dramatic traditions the audience was used to, and present-day film, and also between real time and the diegetic time in film. Film music is also a cement, which holds together elements that otherwise would oppose each other. It can be seen as adding meaning or organising discourse. Obviously, filmmakers can go against this and play on this relationship by adding very contradictory music. In the book, Composing for the Films, Eisler states that the relationship between score and image is not one of similarity, but, as a rule, one of question and answer, affirmation and negation, appearance and essence. Any music will do something and have an effect, and this is definitely a struggle for me. I quite enjoy the effects created by adding not so obvious musical matches, but this isn't a decision for the composer to make. In 2015, a research project was undertaken by Nanette Nilsson at the University of Oslo that looked into film soundtracks and their effect on the audience. This study focused on a theatrical experience that involved the audience as active participants of the story, and spectators were engaged mentally, emotionally, and physically with the process. Nilsson observed that music and sound turned out to play a fantastic role by enabling the players to become more absorbed in the action. They became more deeply involved in what was going on. They became less self-conscious and more confident in their roles. What kept people captivated was the music. It made them hold on to the right amount of self-reflection and engagement so that they weren't pulled out of the experience. We learned from the players that they did not perceive the music as something that supported a linear story. Instead, music played a part in how they understood their own role in the drama. Her point is that rather than music being used simply as a narrative tool, like it was initially used in the silent film era, it runs a lot deeper and affects us in a less analytical way. The music helps the audience to become first perspective holders in the experience, rather than simply spectators. With this in mind, look at this scene from Capture. At what point do what emotional responses need reinforcing here? Does a man walking across a bridge need any help evoking an emotional response? Does finding a camera on the floor? Should the music follow the man's perspective, the audience's, or some kind of all-knowing third eye? Who is watching this man? How much does the music know? Do the sinister undertones need preempting, or does the filmmaker want to keep those as a surprise and convince the viewer they are watching something more light-hearted? By their nature, films are very manipulative things. The camera chooses where to look for us, and the music chooses how we feel, and really these are all choices made by the director. As Guido Helt says in Music and Levels of Narration in Film, this is the equivalent of narrative situations in real life, A friend telling us over a pint in the pub what happened to her that day, using the selection, restriction, and ordering of information, but also rhetoric, gestures, and facial expressions to make the story suspenseful, funny, harrowing, or whatever else she may want it to be. But we assume that the facts of the story are out there. Telling them means to present them so as to achieve a certain effect. This aspect narrative concerns the means to present a story effectively, wherever that story comes from. Without having the director to talk to on this occasion, I had to make these choices for myself. I could start the music here, or here, to introduce the idea that there might be more than meets the eye to this camera. The soundtrack could also begin here, to change the mood from a man walking around to this mysterious cat and mouse game. Here feels like there's a change of tone in the film, almost like the main character seems to be a bit more aware that something might be a bit sinister, but at the same time he can't resist looking. There is a difference when he raises the camera this time, almost like he can feel where the woman is standing, rather than being surprised to see her like before. I felt like this was something that needed emphasizing. Another question I had about this film is that there's a lot of change of perspective between the film camera and the character's camera, and was this something that needed to be highlighted? Does there need to be a different sound world or a sound staging in the camera lens because it's a different world? Is this a jump scare or a more romantic moment? The film up to this point could be put across as a romantic chase, and the hand reaching out here could be scored as either intensely scary or like a romantic longing. Another point I had to think about was the reveal around 2:27. Here we realise what's happened, but the character doesn't until 2:33. Which reveal is more important and therefore needs highlighting more? A lot of decisions I came to just arose from trial and error and seeing what was more effective, but this is definitely the kind of thing having a director to talk to would be very helpful for.